You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Homefield Apparel.
And welcome, Hoosier fans, and maybe just a couple Boiler fans. Welcome to you, too. It's Big Ten basketball. This is not the Assembly Call. This is Coach's Corner for the Assembly Call community. We're going live to talk Indiana-Purdue, the basketball rivalry that is at the top of college basketball. I don't care what Duke, North Carolina says. We got a rivalry game tomorrow night up here close to where I live at Mackey Arena. And joining me today is my good friend, despite that shirt that he's wearing, a really outstanding basketball guy, Joe Jackson of Boilers in the Stands, the equivalent of AC for us. And he also does some film work for the Big Ten called Feed the Post. Joe is just a great guy to talk basketball with, and we're having him on to get a Purdue perspective of this year and of the rivalry altogether. Joe, welcome to Coach's Corner. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I appreciate you having me on. Been looking forward to this, even though maybe there isn't as much hype for a normal rivalry game. It's still a rivalry game, and that's always going to be fun. Always exciting to talk about. Love talking hoops with you, so I'm looking forward to this.
So we're going to spend some time going over this season, what happened in Game 1. Maybe some keys to making a competitive game for Indiana. And then we're going to end the show talking about the Big Ten. Joe covers it a lot. We cover it at Delphi Bracketology, and we'll end up with some Big Ten basketball. If you have any questions, throw them in the chat. We have one from our community already. But Coach's Corner and all of us, Assembly Call on the Back Home Network, is presented by Homefield Apparel, our friends who just dropped Purdue and IU new gear today. So go to homefieldapparel.com, order some new gear. I'm wearing a University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, just got it in the mail. My niece went there, and one of my former bracketology is Division I baseball player at Milwaukee. And you can never have enough home field gear. So thanks to them for this sweatshirt, and I've already made some purchases of the new IU stuff. So if you're Purdue fans, I know the good brand does a lot with the Indiana Hoosiers, but there are some kind of nice pieces of gear for you Purdue fans. Go to homefieldapparel.com. So before the first game, Joe and Boilers in the Stands and Craig, they had me on the show talking IU. We just wanted to reciprocate here. And let's review what happened in Game 1. It was an 87-66 victory for the Purdue Boilermakers in a game that wasn't close other than maybe the first few minutes of each half, and then Purdue kind of took over from there. Joe, just your general thoughts of what happened in general for your Purdue Boilermakers to come out victorious in Game 1.
Yeah, I mean, I think you start with you look at what Edey's able to do. 33 points, 14 rebounds. Like, he's had success, at least at an individual standpoint, for the most part against Indiana. Some of it in losses, obviously, over the past couple of years, but it starts there. And then I thought Purdue in general just did a good job of making IU be a perimeter shooting team. Renew was held to 8 points and played 35 minutes. I know Ware and Mabako, they got in foul trouble, and that is a key point, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, in a sec. But in general, just I thought it was a really good game plan from Painter of putting whoever the 4 was on Renew, putting Edey on Ware, and usually Purdue always doubles the post. It's just what they do defensively. But instead of doubling big to big, they usually doubled with a guard, and so now Edey was still there. You couldn't get that big to big pass, and Purdue basically just said, "Hey, we dare you to beat us from the perimeter, and if you do, we'll adjust. We'll figure it out from there." That little spurt in that second half, IU started beating them from the perimeter. I think Mabako hit a couple. I think Cups might have hit a 3 in that span. Galloway, but in general, Purdue just stuck to their guns still, and then did what they did offensively. You got the perimeter shooting from Warrior, from Jones. Braden Smith didn't shoot the ball well. He played really well elsewhere, and it was just a pretty good team effort. And then when you have Zach Edey who can do what he does, it's gonna lead to a lot of wins.
Indiana takes 24 threes, which we've all been clamoring for taking them. They hit 8, 33%, acceptable. But you did bring up something that I think is very, very key in talking about Purdue. You talk about the guards, the freshman guards becoming sophomores. You talk about Zach Edey offensively. but Purdue played pretty well defensively as they have. It has taken outstanding efforts from that 3-point line to beat Purdue this year at Northwestern, at Nebraska. And then later on, there's a good question about fouling, which I'm sure you hear a lot of. But teams had to kind of be even on the foul line as well. Those are the two statistical things to beat Purdue, which has only happened twice this year. So let's talk a little bit more about that doubling. You are absolutely right. Most of the time, Purdue goes big to big and then drops a guard down to crack down on the weak side. They didn't do that. They went. They did a lot of, I think, diagonal from the weak side perimeter. They didn't go dig from the strong side, right? Your thoughts?
Not usually.
Yeah, is that the only time you've seen that, or is that just something Painter pulls out? What were your thoughts about that doubling technique by Coach Painter?
I loved it because, like you just said too, like Purdue usually doubles big to big. I'm trying to. There might be a game or two that I'm missing, and just kind of trying to quickly go through where it's like they might have doubled with a guard, but I think generally it's usually big to big. Because also usually it's Edey being posted up, so then you bring over the 4, whether it's TKR, Gillis first, and you get some length in there and just try to disrupt, and then have your guard drop down on the weak side. But yeah, no, like you said, I thought it was a really good, because that was one of the things I was worried about was what exactly does Purdue do with the bigs, and it's a credit, it's a respect to Renew, not only his scoring ability, knowing Purdue's just going to have to double, right? They're not going to trust him one-on-one for the most part, but also his passing ability. He is, Renew is a pretty good passer, and with Ware being 7 foot and long and can hang out in that dunker spot or whatever around the rim, I think Painter was really worried about that, it seemed like. And when you go up and down the roster, I know on your guys' end, 3-point shooting is a hot topic the whole year. I think Painter just made the decision that he's going to live with those. He was not going to live with Renew getting layups or Ware getting lob dunks. So not something that I recall Purdue doing a ton this year, but I think Painter recognized the situation and adjusted.
It'll be interesting to see if that continues, which I think it probably would. And the best thing about that, I think, not from my vantage point, but is you take away that lob, the buddy ball that we've nicknamed it, where you double and they throw it up, and because of the size advantage of Ware being 7'2" and athletic, he just grabs it and dunks it before the guard can come down. And even when the guard is in good position, you have a size advantage. And so that's something tomorrow night for everyone to watch, is exactly how does Coach Painter and the Purdue Boilermakers decide to play Indiana defensively, where Indiana's strength is definitely in the inside with those two. But let's talk about another strength. Mackenzie Mbako has played really well, and he's moving his game to another level, especially defensively. If he can play halfway decent defensively, he's been able to hit some shots. He's been driving more, coming off screens. And in that first game, Joe, he had 7 real quick points. And you pointed out just an excellent point in the preview show that you thought Lawyer would be on Mbako, and that it would be a key if Lawyer was struggling, that they would sub Lawyer out for someone on the bench to guard Mbako. Well, it didn't get that way because Mbako got in foul trouble and Coach Woodson benched him for the rest of the half, I think at the 17-minute mark, according to my notes. But he had 7 points early. And what happens there, in my opinion, is if you put pressure on Lawyer, then you're forcing Coach Painter to have to make a decision, maybe a little better defender than the offense, and Lawyer was a key offensive piece in that first half. How do you think that matchup goes, and is that maybe a spot where Indiana can make this a competitive game if Mbako can stay out of foul trouble? Ware as well was in foul trouble, but that matchup is intriguing to me.
Yeah, when you go through the roster, right, like that is where Lawyer's going to match up. I would assume, because Johnson's out for a while, right?
Yes, indefinitely right now.
Yeah, so Smith will take Cubs, and I think Jones will take Galloway once again just because of his ability to get into the lane and facilitate. And so that does leave Lawyer on Mbako, and Mbako has a few inches of height on him, and just when Lawyer gets taken out of the game, more often than not, it's because of the defensive end. And so you get Mbako where you can have him kind of running off the stagger pin downs and things like that IU runs. It's definitely a way to attack Purdue, right? That's Purdue's weakest defender of the starting 5. And there are times where it's just you kind of have to take him. And now, as of right now, the guy that's coming in more is Ethan Morton, just because of of what he can do defensively. But then if that happens, then IU has the potential to basically ignore Morton. And now you're getting a little bit more of a, not completely ignore, but more of a 4-on-5 type thing on the other end. That's going to be a huge matchup. Like, I think one of the ways Indiana stays close or even wins this is Mbako is going to have a big night. He's going to have to hit threes. He's going to have to be aggressive too, right? It'll be good if he can hit threes, but he can do that against any defender. He can't get to the rim as easily against every defender as maybe Lawyer. And so we'll see what Heidi is. Heidi hasn't been playing great for Purdue. He hasn't been playing a ton of minutes. It's been more of Morton in that wing spot off the bench. So, but also the other thing is if Mbako gets cooking, like, it wouldn't be unreasonable to see Jones get a crack at him. I mean, Jones just shut down AJ Storr. He had a pretty good defensive game against Dalton Connect way back early in November. So like, he's had success against these bigger wings. I'm curious to see if that happens. I assume to start though he wouldn't.
Yeah, and really, I think Indiana, the stir that stirs the drink, or the straw that stirs the drink. There we go. A whole week of teaching kids has got me a little confused there. But the straw that stirs the drink is Trey Galloway. A close game against Kansas. He got going in the second half to start the Purdue game and ended up with 17 points, I believe. And then just now the comeback, the 19 points in the second half against Ohio State on the road, to come back from 18 points. When he gets going, and that little zoom action that the Indiana had success last year with the handoff at the elbow, and now they're going to a little more of a wide with a pin down to the corner, guard-to-guard pin down, and then Galloway's coming off of that into a handoff, and then they're doing like a roll replace with the big on the side. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But I do think Lance Jones on Galloway is the way you got to go, because you really don't want Galloway to get going. You're going to kind of roll the dice again with a freshman, talented Mbako, but he can get in foul trouble. He can do some things and then make the adjustments off of that. But let's talk Lance Jones and Fletcher Lawyer a little bit for our Indiana fans. I thought they were the key in game one. Both had over 15 points, hit some daggers of shots early, some drives, and Lance Jones has done that in a lot of games, hit big shots. I don't think he misses an opportunity to take one.
No.
The dude wakes up shooting baskets, from his apartment into Mackey. He has no filter. But what an addition for Purdue, and a weapon, because he can guard and he can score. I thought both of those young men were effective in game one. Your thoughts on those two?
Yeah, I mean, starting with Lance Jones, he's been a revelation this year. He went from, even we had Boilers in the stands. I think I'm not trying to take credit, because we were still way off, but we were on the higher end of like projecting Lance Jones of like, oh, he could be like a 15-minute a game guy. He's going to give good defense and he can get to the rim, and you just live with the shooting. And one thing we did mention was, like, when you go through his 3-point percentages in his career, you look at last year, it was 26%, and that's the number that stands out. But he's also shot like 43%. I call it the Lance Jones experience, and that's what it is. It's you're going to get some nights where he's just, like an IU night where he goes for 17 or Wisconsin, I think he had over 20, I believe. He had 20 against Wisconsin, 26 against Northwestern. Like, he has these nights where he can just do it. Like you said, he's not afraid to get up any shot, but most of the time it's not necessarily a bad thing, because when you go through Purdue's roster, Braden Smith's played phenomenal this year, and he's been much better. But at times there's just like this, who's going to actually create a shot if you can't get the ball down to Edey? Lance Jones will never, ever be afraid. I don't care if they're down 20 in a road environment or whatever. Lance Jones will take the shot. And then he's the best defender best perimeter defender on the team. And that's not really close right now. He's only 6'1", but he's sturdy. He's 200 pounds. Like, he plays physical. And that's why you see him get the AJ Storr, the Dalton Connect matchups, or the Boo Buie matchups. Like, he's just going to go guard the best perimeter defender or perimeter player. It's not going to matter if he's 6 foot or 6'8". He's going to get the crack, because that's what Painter needs. And it's just been, I mean, he's quickly become the third most important Boilermaker. And that's only because Edey's dominant and Braden's one of the best point guards in the country. Like, it's pretty wild to see what he's done. And then going to Fletch, you're seeing a little bit more of the consistency this year. He's up to 43% from three, 51% in Big Ten play. Last year, he started out pretty well. He had a little bit of a lull around the December, early January mark. and then towards March fell off. Him and Brayton both with the freshman legs, freshman wall, whatever you want to call it. This year he's giving, I would say for the most part, a little bit more consistent effort. He is going to shoot threes. He's going to knock down threes at a pretty high rate, and he isn't the best at getting to the rim, but he's another where it's kind of similar to Lance Jones, where it's just like sometimes you just need something down there, and Lawyer's not going to be afraid to go at the rim. His liability is defensively, and Purdue teams have tried to take advantage of that. Notably, Northwestern, that first matchup when Boo Buie just said, "Fletch, come here every single possession." But they're both Fletcher and Lance Jones just can give such huge sparks for this team. And when you have that combined with Brayton and Zach Edey going to do their things, that's what's made Purdue really tough this year. It's not obviously Edey being the best player in the country again, and Brayton Smith being one of the best point guards is gigantic, but it isn't just them. This team can beat you in multiple ways this year, and that's why I think they're a lot different than last year.
So you're the number 2 team in the country in the polls, the number 1 in Delphi bracketology overall seed, just a top-notch team. Thanks. And you're really the clear-cut favorite for the Big Ten. You're playing a rival that you handled by 21 points that has shown some ability to pop here or there. They're having a down year. So as a Purdue fan, a Purdue commentator, what concerns you, and what would be the keys for us Indiana fans to have a chance coming down in the last 3 minutes to pull off a huge upset tomorrow night? What do you think the keys are with the going forward?
Yeah, so for this game for Indiana, I would say one, you need both Mbako and Galloway to have good games. They're going to have to score the ball, and I think Purdue's going to try to take away Renew and Ware as much as possible. Obviously, you want good games from them, but it might just be harder to come by. If Galloway and Mbako can get going, it might be able to alleviate some pressure there. They got to knock down threes. You mentioned it. The Purdue's 2 losses, Northwestern shot 50% from 3 on high volume, and Nebraska shot 61% from 3 on high volume. That's just right now that's one of the things that has to happen. So, IU, I don't know what their season high for made threes is, but they might have to beat it, or at least come close to it, probably around 10 to 12 on decent, pretty good volume. And then defensively, it's something when we had you on our show, you kind of talked about, it was just you have to make the choice of, are you going to live with the perimeter guys, or are you going to live with Zach Edey going for 40? And I know, if I remember right, you were saying, you just let Zach get his and you take away everything on the perimeter. Even that, it's still easier said than done. But if IU can knock down threes, get their wings and guards going, and then Edey's, you're basically not trading threes for twos because that's not Indiana style, but you're making life hard on Edey and shutting down the perimeter. That's kind of got to be the key. Purdue's going to have an off shooting night. They're shooting 44% from 3 at home as a team on the year. So it's, again, not easy to do, but those are scenarios. Is Mbako goes, you get Lawyer out of it, you have to bring in Morton, and then from there, Indiana can do enough defensively to slow Purdue down and keep it in a ball game, force some turnovers, and you're right there.
I think guard pressure is important. When Indiana had success last year, they were able to push Purdue back more towards half court, which made longer passes into Zach Edey. I don't think you stop Zach Edey. You can double him, you can triple him, you can do whatever. The young man has just really earned all of the Player of the Year accolades and all of that. He's just I think I heard someone say, and I'm sorry I can't attribute it correctly, that he distorts the game in so many ways. It might have been Coach Wright on one of the studio shows, but he does. He distorts it defensively for the other team, where Indiana likes to score at the rim a lot. And Coach Woodson likes the post-up game. He likes the drives. And you have Edey sitting there on Ware, and he can play back in the rim and distort at the rim defensively. And then what do you do offensively? You have to try to limit his offensive rebound putbacks. You have to try to push him off to maybe 5 or 6 feet physically and hope that jump hook is off. More likely on the road than happening in Mackey, where they're very, very comfortable. But if you can put pressure, and you saw this, Joe, that Indiana fouled crazy in the first half. It was part of the reason they got down 22. They were trying to be physical, but they weren't smart and physical at the same time. And they fouled, and then they got in the bonus, and then the free throws, and then foul trouble. But you saw I think the secret is to be physical. And this is, again, we have a good question. I'm going to jump to that right now. Jean Paul Satar, I'm going to butcher that last name, but Jean Paul says, "Hey, Coach, my question is, what do you make of the foul disparity that Purdue seems to be enjoying, most clearly exemplified by the Northwestern game? Given the way the Big Ten refs are calling games, it seems simply impossible for IU to have a chance. What am I missing?" It is Zach Edey, and it is the multitude of actions. When you're running handoffs and triple, ball screens and things like that, you're trying to fight through screens. And we've seen Gabe Cupps of ours at the Ohio State game. He tries to be physical and beat people over ball screens, and you're constantly moving and screening for people. That creates fouling, and the way to beat Purdue is to beat Purdue up. I hate to say that, not outside the rules, not flagrant ones or twos, which unfortunately we had a couple in the Purdue game, which is uncalled for from our end. But you have to be physical to push them out of what they want to do, and you're going to get foul calls on that. Now, I know a lot of us will be upset with Zach Edey. We think he fouls more than what he gets called. But your thoughts, you've probably heard it on your show. You probably see it on social media all the time, and you're on the other side of it. You're like, glad we're shooting 42-8, right?
Yeah.
But you also watch Big Ten basketball. What is your take on the foul disparity from Purdue?
So I'll go a little bit deeper after I give my generalized take. My generalized take on specifically Edey in that is, does he get away with stuff? 100%. 100%. My take has always been, though, that for every one of those that Edey gets away with, I could go find 2 or 3 probably that should have been called the other way. And so, yeah, there's definitely clips that come around and just like, yeah, no, that's probably a foul on Edey or whatever. Never will deny that. He has to get hacked so much. And you talk about the physicality, like when Edey's had his, like he has his off games and we'd make a joke of it at this point on Boilers in the Stands, but like Wisconsin, it wasn't a great game for him. He had 18 points, 13 rebounds, and 3 blocks. But it wasn't, because Crowell was able to kind of push him out a little bit, and now Edey's off of his rhythm. Or even it sounds funny because Purdue won by 32, and Edey ended up with 16 and 10 in only 25 minutes of play, but Terrace Reed from Michigan, he did a great job on Edey, and you just have to shove him out and make him catch a 10-foot mark instead of the 8 or 6. And then going to the free throws, it's like you look at how Purdue plays and you look how teams play against Purdue, and they are just not teams that want to go at Edey. I don't have the exact percentages, but the last I checked, it's like 13% or 12% of 12% fewer of shots come at the rim when Edey's on the floor compared to off. Like for other teams, like teams just don't drive at him. And so when you look at the Northwestern game, I know when you just purely look at the 42-8, it's like, how does that happen? When you go through the game, what was Northwestern doing? And doing insanely well. Jumpers. They were getting jumpers. They were getting open threes. They were getting pin downs and curling. And so if they were getting a 2, it's probably a little bit of a floater or it was a wide open dunk. And then you go to the other end, like Northwestern specifically, they foul more than any team in the entire conference. Like it's not just a Purdue thing. That just gets exemplified. I mean, Collins said before the game, he's like, I have 15 fouls to give between my 3 bigs. He gave 15 fouls between the 3 bigs. So I understand the frustration from the outside, and especially because there is 100% things that could be called on Edey. I just think it's very easily can go the other way, and that's where it gets annoying, where it's just like both sides are sort of right, and now these refs are in this impossible spot of they're probably never going to get everything right.
I think Zach Edey is the toughest player to officiate in college basketball. Because he's just so big and strong, and people bounce off him. And then when he moves his elbows, he's going to hit most people in the forehead because of the size disparity. And then just a simple block out, he sends people out, 3 counties. He's just physical. And do you call everything and then put the young man out of the game? Do you not call stuff and then you get coaches and fans all in an uproar? I just think he's difficult to officiate. Yeah. I know everyone gets mad at the officials, but the officials at this level are some of the best. They don't always do what we think, and when you see a high-definition television and you see calls in slow motion, you get a little frustrated. But I just think that's a real hard guard and
And he's just
hard officiating.
Yeah. And it's just like he plays like 35 minutes a game, or I don't know what his actual numbers at. His actual numbers probably closer to 30, but in meaningful games, he's playing 35, 36 minutes, and the dude does not take a play off. And so that's what adds to it too, is it's every play that it's somebody's either hanging on him or he's banging with somebody or push it every play. And so that's all. I think that's also part of it too, because then it's like you said, how do you call everything as a ref? And that's where it just gets tough.
So it's going to be an uphill climb for us Indiana Hoosiers, especially in Mackey, with just as a fantastic atmosphere, and it's going to be loud, and the venom's going to be, flying all over the place. But I do think you were spot on with Indiana basketball. When they win games, they have one or two just super outstanding performances. Hood Schifino with the pull-up jumper that never missed. Takes down Purdue, and that's not driving in the lane against Edie. That's not settling for threes, but that was a recipe. You had Trace Jackson Davis in the first game last year with the Chicago action. The little floater from Trey Galloway caused a lot of problems, and then we had alley-oops to an NBA player. So Indiana's got to find a way to replicate that to be in a ball game in a very, very tough environment. I'd like to transfer now to just talk a little bit and share with our viewers how Coach Painter uses his bench as far as rotation, minutes. I heard him say once he wants one ball handler out there at all times between Lance Jones and Braden Smith, and he tries to get some rest while the other's out there and vice versa. Mm-hmm. But explain to our followers, we've had issues with massive subs, and usually at the 8-minute mark, the production of the Indiana basketball team drops off as the 2, 3, 4 subs come in the game from Coach Woodson. So how does that compare to Matt Painter's approach with using the bench?
Yeah, I think as the season's gone on, it's definitely the rotation has slimmed down to more of basically an 8-man rotation at this point. You first gets a few minutes in the first half usually, and maybe a couple in the second. That ball handler thing that you mentioned. So aside from garbage minutes and all that, I do not recall a single minute this entire year that 2 of Braden Smith, Lance Jones, and Ethan Morton were not on the floor. He just has 2 of those at all times. Ethan Morton will be the secondary ball handler if needed when Lance Jones runs point. And that's for the 4 minutes a game that Braden Smith sits, which has been a topic for us kind of Purdue fans of like, there's been a couple games where Braden just looks gassed at the end. And you look and he's played 39 minutes, but at the same time, like Braden just sets up everything for Purdue pretty much, and you just can't, like, the offense just falls off so much without him in there. So there is that, but I could basically just go through the rotation. It's pretty much the same every game at this point, and then towards the end, Painter just goes with whatever lineup's needed. You get 5 or so minutes of that starting lineup with TKR at the 4, and then you have Smith, Lawyer, Jones plus Edie. Then Mason Gillis is going to come in for TKR at the 4, and then one of Morton or Heidi is going to come in for usually Lance Jones to get him his rest. And so you still have the 2 ball handlers. You go through that for a bit, and then it basically just kind of oscillates between TKR and Gillis. Whoever has the better matchup is going to get the more minutes towards the end of the half. Generally, it is Gillis. And then if you need ball handlers, it's going to be for sure Smith and Jones, and then one of Lawyer, Heidi, or Morton. And then that Lawyer, Heidi, Morton's probably the biggest toss-up, where we mentioned, like, if Mbako gets going, you're going to see probably more of Morton and Heidi. If not, you're going to see more of Lawyer because of what he can do offensively. And Painter trusts all 8 of those guys a lot. First has just been squeezed, and it's like he has a lot of talent. It's just not quite there because Zach Edey plays 36 minutes a game or whatever in meaningful games. So it becomes hard there. But I mean, when you look, this team isn't quite as deep as maybe we were hoping as Purdue fans going into the season. But at the same time, coming off the bench, you have Mason Gillis, who's started for 4 years for Purdue, and you have Ethan Morton, who started for like 2 years. Like you basically have 6 starters for Purdue and Mason Gillis. Ethan Morton has accepted his role as a senior coming off the bench, and then your only guy that hasn't started consistently in rotation right now out of all 9, including Caleb First, the only player that hasn't started at some point consistently is Camden Heidi, a redshirt freshman. And so there is that depth, and Painter can rotate through guys if needed. But at the end of the day, he's going to rock with Smith, Jones, Edey, usually Gillis, and then whatever wing he needs at that point.
So I want to ask you about an Indiana Hoosier who is getting a lot of love down here recently, and that's Anthony Leal. He has waited forever to get some run, and he's come in and he had a game the other night of 13 points, a career high, and then he hits a game winner in the last 20 seconds at Ohio State. Former Indiana Mr. Basketball. As we're talking bench and rotations, this is someone that our fan base is just extremely proud of, because he represents what both of our programs do is good state of Indiana basketball, with Gene Cady, Bob Knight, motion offense, good defense, all of those things. And I think Anthony Leal really represents that as someone from afar, watching a young man like that who hasn't played a lot all of a sudden now get his run. Your thoughts on our Anthony Leal?
It's been fun to see. I mean, he's got really good minutes and good production over the last 4 games. And part of it is just confidence too. Like there was the clip, and I wasn't watching live the Indiana Ohio State game because I was watching the rock fight that was Maryland versus Rutgers. But I saw the clip, and I believe it was right before he hit the game winner, and you just see him in the huddle, and he just tells everybody, he's like, "Hey, we're gonna go win this." Like, that's the senior leadership that you want from a guy, even though he's off the bench, hasn't had the time at Indiana that he's wanted, I would assume. But you just sometimes need that as a team, right? A leader off the bench comes in, gives you a spark, especially with kind of how the Indiana bench has gone this year. I know CJ Gunn hasn't had the year that most would have liked. And then Walker, Sparks they're more bigs, but like when Johnson's out, really your only backup guard besides Leal is CJ Gunn, who hasn't had a great year. And so as much as I am a Purdue fan, I am also a Big Ten fan. And so I try to limit my bias as much as possible. I'm not perfect, but when I look at a guy like Anthony Leal, it's just fun to see. I'm an Indiana kid going to Indiana and being able to provide that spark that, in a game like tomorrow, if Indiana is able to stick around, like there's a decent chance that Leal's going to get minutes and be a reason why.
I'd like to get your opinion, too, as you are a fan of the Big Ten and you watch a lot of basketball and a lot of Big Ten basketball. Indiana will be without Xavier Johnson. He's had an up-and-down career, had a really good run at the end of his first year in 22, and then injuries last year kept him out, and then injuries again this year has just unfortunately hurt the young man. He would make Indiana better tomorrow with his speed of beating people off the dribble. And I also think defensively he's undervalued with his pressure that he could put on the Purdue ball handlers. But we have a young man, Gabe Cupps, who is a freshman, and you've seen two freshman guards last year. Gabe Cupps is not the same player as Xavier Johnson, but he is going to be a good college basketball player. Share with us your thoughts on what you've seen on Gabe Cupps and what he brings to the Indiana Hoosiers.
Yeah, I think first thing, it's just been unfortunate with the injuries and stuff that Cupps has been thrown into a role that he probably wasn't quite ready for. And playing these starter level minutes, like he has it in him, and I do think he'll be a very good player with maybe even next year. I could totally see a sophomore jump from him. Kid that works hard. He understands the game. Like you can see it in a high school film, and you could see it this year at times. Like he just understands the game. He has that that IQ that you want from a point guard to be able to kind of run the offense. I think he isn't the most physically built, but he has that kind of like mindset to him of, he wants to get into defenders. He wants to try to play physical. He wants to try to get through ball screens defensively. And that's, to a lesser extent, kind of what Xavier Johnson brings too. Right. So I'm excited to see where he goes. Like, I think he can be a skilled offensive player, somebody that is able to run pick and roll, and just kind of orchestrate the offense in a way that, IU hasn't quite been able to do this year. But I think more than anything right now, it's just unfortunate that he's been probably thrown into a role much bigger than what he was anticipating and what he was probably ready for. Sometimes it works. I don't know if you would say last year Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer were necessarily ready, but they got thrown in and it worked out. So, but I don't think anybody should write off Gabe Cupps or anything like that, even if he hasn't statistically given the season that many have wanted. There's still plenty of good things that he's done.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in Gabe Cupps, again, for a lot of the reasons Anthony Leal. You have your Trace Jacksons, your Race Thompsons, who do a lot and mean a lot for a program. And I think he was meant to be a backup point guard this year and learn the system and learn the college game and come in and give valuable minutes, 15 to 20 minutes maybe as a freshman, thrown into a starter. And then it's just different. Xavier is speed. He just blows by people. And then when he's going well, he's an assist machine as well as a scorer. And Gabe Cupps right now is not. He's got to be a little more nuanced. He's a little more of a point guard that initiates offense when you're moving. And Coach Woodson likes to have a lot of isolation and one-on-one and find the matchup and draw two and then kick. And Gabe has to work his way into that is where I'm thinking. But I'm going to come back to you as an expert on the Big Ten and roster construction, as it's been a big conversation here in the world of Indiana basketball about roster construction. What kind of players do you need? Purdue has a pretty solid inside game. You have Trey Kaufman, Ren Gillis at the 4 that can do a variety of things, and we've talked about the guards. But you have Illinois and Michigan State. What do you see in the Big Ten is an ideal type of roster in order to be successful, not only in the Big Ten, but are there any changes that the Big Ten needs to make in order to go beat the Dukes, the North Carolinas, the Kansas? Thoughts on roster construction?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I think you can go through a decent bit of these rosters and just be like, does it really fit? I mean, Indiana is one of them. Michigan is clearly one. Maryland's the other one that comes to mind off the top of my head. And so I think Big Ten is starting to, you see a little bit more diversity. You're starting to see that with like how Illinois is playing, how Northwestern's playing. And we'll see what happens when Bowie leaves for them. Even Michigan State is guard oriented right now, and they're struggling. But I think we're starting to see a little bit going away from purely bigs to incorporating some of these guards, which is what Big Ten probably just needs to find more success in March. I mean, even when you look at Purdue, like if Purdue, I know it's a big if Purdue goes far in March, Edey's going to have to be great, obviously, but it's going to be Lance Jones, it's going to be Braden Smith, it's going to be Fletcher Loyer. Like, those are the guys that are going to carry him that way. And so I think you have to find a roster that in some capacity you still need some sort of inside game, right? You still need some sort of big that he doesn't have to be the star of the teams, as I think kind of the Big Ten is synonymous with at this point. But if you look at like Michigan State, if they just had a solid rotation big, are they on the bubble right now? They're probably not. But then you look at Illinois, who, they're not really, their big is Coleman Hawkins, who isn't necessarily a traditional big. And so, but Brad Underwood's done a really good job of finding 6-7 guys that can all play that way together, of, whether it be in isolation and you're just going to move the ball more than they have in the past. But yeah, I think you need some sort of big, but it's transitioning more to like, this conference really needs guards. And I mean, I've said it a couple times, like when you go through the point guards right now in the Big Ten, there really are a lot of good ones, and a lot of them are pretty young. Braden Smith, Bruce Thornton, Elijah Hawkins for Minnesota will come back next year. I'm just not naming everybody off the top of my head, but just going through a few. Like, there are more talented point guards, and I think that's what's needed. I wanted to quickly go to IU because it's unfortunate. I'm excited to see hopefully him healthy and playing next year, but somebody that like Indiana would have needed this year is Ja'Kai Newton, a guy off the bench that is this dynamic kind of combo guard wing, can create. Like, those types of players, I think we're going to see sprout up more in the Big Ten. And hopefully as that happens, you start seeing more postseason success for the Big Ten in general.
Yeah, C.J. Gunn, we were hoping he would make that freshman to sophomore leap, and he has not. He's really struggled. But that's that prototypical 6'6", can shoot the three, can elevate, can drive. I'm really big on closers. I think you need a point guard. Think you need a guy that can come off screens and heel, toe, shoot, not just kick out three. And I think you need a slasher finisher, Ayu Dosunmu from Illinois. Go get the bucket. Yes, we're going to go get the bucket. But I want to continue the talk here about the stretch four and the ability for fives to shoot the three. And can teams win with two bigs that aren't stretching the floor? And I know that's kind of a loaded question here from the Indiana universe, but I watch so much basketball with the bracketology stuff that the Nebraska 5 is jacking up threes and hitting them in games. And he's not super athletic. And then you turn on, VCU and their 5 is doing that. So you do need a 5. You do need a stretch 4. You do need to post up at times in this game to get fouled. But the game is changing to a face-up game, even in the post. Can you win with a double post, double low post? I think you can win with one.
Yeah.
But you watch basketball a lot too. Are we nuts, or are we just, the negative people because we're losing? What are your thoughts on that piece of the 4 and the 5 in roster construction?
I think at this point, one of them has to be able to shoot in sub. You have to be able to shoot enough to get respect, right? Because there's a difference between being able to knock down an open 3 and getting respect, right? I think if Kalel Ware against Purdue in the first possession, if he picks and pops at the top of the key, I don't expect Edey to close out at him. It's going to be, if he makes it, he makes it. If he makes 2 or 3, then they adjust. And so you have to be able to get respect from one of them. I mean, you see it even with Wisconsin. What Purdue did there was, and Tyler Wall eventually got his, but basically, if Tyler Wall was more than 12 feet from the rim, Edey was just staying in the paint, and Steven Crowell got taken out of the game. Purdue does it some with TKR. He's one of those where it's kind of like I said, where TKR his percentage is decent on the year. It's not high enough volume to get any respect, so he's going to get his one open attempt this game, and it's basically just a coin flip, right? Does it go in or not, and you move on to the next possession. But Purdue has Gillis, who can come in and has been one of the best shooters in the Big Ten. I think at this point you need at least one, because it makes it easy. When you have at least one, then teams can't completely ignore a player, at least on the perimeter. And right now, I think you're seeing a lot of teams do that, where there's just if one of these bigs that can't shoot goes out there, then they're basically just saying we're going to zone up our big, play at the rim. Also, a guards being able to knock down shots is nice. As I look at Maryland and Rutgers specifically, like it's not like they play double big for the most part. They just don't have dudes that can knock down threes.
It's a guards game. Bob Thompson, who is in charge of all of our music here, always makes fun of me for saying that over and over and over again. But now you Indiana fans find out that I'm not the only guy who thinks it's a guards game and you need stretch 4s and you need even 5s to pick and pop. But, Joe, you brought up something that I think that I would really take advantage of against Purdue, and I'm not saying it's the secret sauce because I still think it's a long shot tomorrow night. I'd pick and pop Ware all night long and tell him to shoot 6, 7 threes. And if he misses, we're going to get beat anyway. But if he has one of those games, 4 or 5, now you're forcing Coach Painter and the Purdue Boilermakers to change. Now maybe you have you put Gillis or Trey Kaufman-Wren on a 7-footer, and now you can – do some different things. And that's you got to have your thumb on this game. I think that's something that Coach Painter and his staff do really well at watching and seeing where the advantages are, seeing where they need to make adjustments. I'm not sure Indiana does that very well within the game. I think they plan well. That's why the first 7 or 8 minutes, Joe, are really good of each half, because I think they sit down and they're good, really good after timeouts and out of bounds. Why? Because they need time to think about it. And I'm trying to be fair here, but then sometimes we get the same stuff over and over again that's not working. I would pick and pop Ware all night long, or renew whoever's being played off of. I would pick and pop and say, you know what? We're going to shoot a ton of threes because we can't score a whole lot against Edey. I think sometimes you got to take advantage, but I think that's there. So we got a few minutes left. I do thank you for your time, and there's some very nice comments in our chat here. Sherry, we appreciate your kind words about this conversation. Coaches in the Big Ten. I think there's some outstanding coaches. You get to go into the press conferences. I think there's some really, really good coaches. Besides Coach Painter, who are some of your favorites, either because of the way they coach or just the way they interact in the media, that you like from the Big Ten?
So this year specifically, I've loved what Ben Johnson has done at Minnesota, and their non-conference was easy and all that. But this was, Minnesota was a bottom 2 team coming into the season, and they're right in the midst of it, in the Big Ten. I think he's done really well with adjustments in the second half. So he's one I've enjoyed watching. I think Fred Hoiberg, I enjoy his style of play watching, where it's just kind of this more free flowing, and he has the guys that can do it, which helps. But more of this free flowing and just kind of, read and react type offense. You can initiate with your big at the top of the key, whether it be through handoffs or back cuts off of him and things like that. So that's been fun. This one is probably the most controversial, but like I love Brad Underwood for whatever he is. Like he just
you are my man.
It's like Coleman Hawkins. As much as there's the antics, Coleman Hawkins is one of my favorite players to watch in the Big Ten. And yes, there's the yelling and complaining about all of that. But at the end of the day, like I enjoy watching them play. I just do. I think Brad Underwood, especially this year, has done a good job where, they're still not like a crazy high assist team, but they move the ball better. And for me, watching Illinois, I think it's the most puzzle-like team where it's just like, what matchup can we exploit and how do we get that matchup? And then he's built a defense that's fallen off a little bit, but is going to be a defense that similar to like a Purdue and is just going to force a lot of mid-range shots, and you live with them. Hawkins has been great and leads that. Domask obviously has been good. But yeah, I know it probably gets hate, but I have to be truthful, and Brad Underwood's one of my favorites.
Hey, Craig just commented in the chat, no, Joe, no, just no. But you are my man. If we weren't working tomorrow night, I'd buy you a beer or drink or something. I catch a lot of grief from our assembly call fans, especially one of our contributors, Mediocre Jay Horry. We get in arguments when we get into Bloomington and have a few pops about Brad Underwood. But I second that. Sorry, Craig. You can dislike Joe and I both. I do think he does a good job. I love listening to him in press conferences. Mm-hmm. As a coach, I'm usually 100% pro coach around the country, and I really, really enjoy listening to him explain what happened in a game, both after wins and losses. And I just do. I think they play basketball in a certain way that is, he loses the big man, and then IU a couple years ago, and now they're back in it. And I know there's been a lot of controversy over there with the Terrence Shannon stuff, but I don't know all of the legality and stuff. I'm just talking pure basketball. But I just think there's some really good basketball. You mentioned Minnesota, Penn State, two teams that have been at the bottom of most Big Ten power rankings, wherever you look for your power rankings, and they're making a run. I think it's impossible for them to make the NCAA tournament. I'm not saying that at all. They're way, way down the consideration list, but they're giving teams fits, and they are playing good basketball. The rebound for those two teams, your thoughts?
Yeah, Penn State. So I'll start with Penn State. They were, as I did my offseason work, I watched film on every transfer and freshman coming in. So just watching a couple games film on all these transfers, one of my more confident takes was like, I don't know how Penn State does it, but they were projected roughly 4 to 5 Big Ten wins. I was like, I don't know how Penn State does it, but they're going to find the way to get to 6 or 7 Big Ten wins, and they probably are going to pass that. They're 6-6 with 8 games left, couple winnable games for sure in there. And Mike Rose has just done a good job of, he has their identity. They are going to be, it is a much worse team than last year. All due respect compared to last year's Penn State team, but they're going to jack up a ton of threes. They're going to be pretty good defensively, not great, especially on the perimeter. That's where their defensive identity lies, with Ace Baldwin, who's been one of the better point guards in the Big Ten for sure. And having him come over with from VCU obviously helps Rhodes. Just being able to have him be able to go create an offense and be an absolute menace defensively. They're going to force turnovers, and if not, then teams are going to score in the paint. But yeah, they're feisty, and I thought they'd be better defensively. Honestly, I didn't think this type of offense would be, and offense is relative to preseason projection, I would say. But that's also because Kanye Clary has really stepped up. He's taken a huge freshman to sophomore leap. But no, I think Mike Rhodes, that's just who he is. From you look at his time as VCU, it's just some scrappy teams, and they're going to play hard-nosed defense. This year, they don't have the interior defenders to make it like an elite defense or really good defense, but they still have those perimeter guys. He went out, and in the portal, he got one guard and one big, and basically every single other player was like this potential 3-and-D type wing, 6'8", in some capacity can shoot the ball and hopefully defend. So really good job by him. And then, yeah, Minnesota, they were one I was not big on coming into the year. And the biggest thing was I didn't know what Elijah Hawkins could do. He took the jump from Howard to Minnesota. I didn't fully trust that he'd be ready for Big Ten play. And he started to really find his groove. You pair that with, Dawson Garcia has been a top 15 player in the conference, I would say, pretty comfortably. And you get better shooters. I love Cam Christie. I think he's been phenomenal. I was pretty big on him coming into the season. And I think Ben Johnson as a whole, especially after, I would say once we got into Big Ten play, especially, because I think they struggled still a little bit that first month or so. He's just been so good, I think, of making adjustments that are needed, whether it be just running the ball through Elijah Hawkins offensively or figuring out what they need to take away defensively, which is where they've been improved. I think he's done a great job. And like, if Minnesota gets to 11 Big Ten wins, I would have to guess he's probably Big Ten Coach of the Year.
Yeah, very, very good job lately winning some games. On the other end of the spectrum, Joe, we have Ohio State and Michigan. Yeah. Coach Holtman came in well-renowned, had a good run for a few years, but the last 2 years have just been devastating. And then Juwan Howard at Michigan, those are teams you would not have ever predicted would be sitting. I think they're 13th and 14th right now in the standings. Your thoughts on the fall of those two traditionally solid basketball programs?
Yeah, I think Michigan, it's just a lot of roster stuff. Like they went out and got a ton of power forwards, but it's not even that. It's that a lot of their skills, I think, overlap. And Trey Jackson, they have their differentials, and Trey Jackson's like more of a slasher, and Williams is more of a shooter, and Nakama is more of your high post type player. I just don't think that the fit was there. And then I also think I feel like Howard goes away from what's working at times. And that's where a lot of the second half stuff goes away. And then you have that combined with it just seems like they don't always play together, just as a cohesive unit. And then there's also the Doug McDaniel stuff going. There's just a lot of stuff going on over there at Michigan. And none of it is really conducive to winning games. They were able to pull out the win against Wisconsin. They're just looking now. Their only 2 wins since mid-December is that Wisconsin win, and then the other one was home against Ohio State, who's fallen off a cliff once again. And the big thing is defense for Ohio State. They're a team that you look at the roster and it makes sense. You have Gale and Thornton, who's good guards. You have Battles, a knockdown shooter. Mahafy's kind of a makeshift 4, can do a little bit of whatever, and then Akbar is a good rim protector. They have not had the perimeter defense that I thought they would and that they had at the start of the year. And then you get that combined with, it just seems like at this point, once the lead starts slipping for Ohio State or once they're down, it's just like, man, this is happening again. And, Holman is what he is as a coach. I think he still has good qualities to him. It's just nothing. They haven't been able to click for 40 minutes in a while. It feels like. Even that Penn State win that they had in that mix, they were they wanted badly to give that game up, and Penn State just didn't allow it.
Yeah, giving up an 18-point lead to our Indiana Hoosiers was something to watch the other night. It was an example of that, and Indiana took advantage of it and got a much-needed win to stay even in the Big Ten. Last question for you, Joe, is how is college basketball in rebuilding and building a program? You hear the sayings, get old, stay old. How difficult is that to do with the transfer portal, the NIL, people leaving early? You need NBA talent in order to go far in the tournament, and sometimes the NBA talent works, sometimes it doesn't. So for Indiana, how quick can Mike Woodson rebound when, we may lose Ware, we may lose Mbako, Xavier Johnson's not coming back. You have guys you never know, and we don't talk about names transferring in or out just out of respect for the young men in the program. Mm-hmm. But there are some people who aren't getting playing time where you might suspect that they leave, and that might even happen at a Purdue at some point. But it is so easy now to disrupt or have a roster disrupted for a variety of reasons. And it's easier to rebuild that somewhat with the NIL and the portal as well. But how quickly can a program really go from down to up? And then is that sustainable over the long haul? You see Indiana an average year that made the tournament as a 12 seed, then a really outstanding year to get a 4 seed, a little disappointed in the tournament, and then again now down. And they're going to have a lot of turnover again next year. Purdue has been able to right the ship. A lot of our fans are waiting to get Edey out of there, and then hopefully you guys come back down. But your thoughts on just how to build continuity in this crazy college basketball world?
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into it, and I think that's part of what makes college basketball so fun is the NBA, which I do love watching the NBA, but the NBA it is more so very much a copycat league, and you still get that in college basketball 100%. But there's 362 teams in D1 this year or whatever, and there's just going to be differences within, and so that's where it's interesting. And I think like Illinois is a great example. Back-to-back years they went pretty heavy in the portal. And last year it didn't click. This year, they returned Hawkins, obviously, who's big, and it's not like they returned Shannon, obviously, too. But they get Domask in the portal, they get Gary in the portal, they get Harmon off the bench, who have all contributed pretty significantly. And so I think it's probably just going to come down to, as a coach, as a program, what they want to do. And Purdue has done it this year, where it's the past 2 years, you just go and get one guy from the portal, you try to fill up this one little spot that you need. And we'll see what happens with transfers, but like Purdue won't probably have a roster spot, so they won't get like a transfer next year at all. But then you go to like IU and Woodson, and I know it's a new world with NIL, and I'm going to quickly plug our show from yesterday. We were able to have Boilermaker Alliance CEO Dave Neff on, who Boilermaker Alliance is like a collective that works with NIL with Purdue. So a lot of like answers, if you want to know more about like NIL and stuff like that, definitely go check that out, because I learned a lot. But like you look at IU and they have, it seems like there's the funding there that they can go get these transfers. It's going to be whether Woodson wants to and whether they all at the end of the day connect. And so I think that's where it's going to be even more important for like coaches. Like obviously they're crazy important as it is, but like if you're going to go get transfer guys, you got to make sure that they're good on the court and they work well in your locker room. And Brad Underwood ran into that last year. But then you look at Tom Izzo, he didn't go to the portal, right? And everybody pretty much now is like, hey, you couldn't have gotten, Rank Most or Ben Crickey is two examples in the Big Ten of like just some big. And a lot of this is easier said than done on the outside, easier than being in their shoes and actually having to go through this. I know Painter does a good job. It's been mentioned in recruiting and transfers. Like they do test basically to make sure that like not even on court, but off court, like the players fit within the program. So it's a tough world with how NIL is. And I think it's a good world and it's good problems to have to solve. And hopefully everything gets kind of regulated and stuff like that. But it also makes it fun where Penn State, they've got 10 transfers and they're competitive. It can happen. It's going to be more important for coaches. And that's where it's like, I would say if you were looking at a single individual season, I'm going back to coach of the year. Like Ben Johnson very much has a case. Mike Rhodes has a case. But if you're looking at like in college, especially, coaches are so important and coaching staffs in recruiting, and you build your entire program where it's like, Painter's built this program that's sustainable right now and has good players coming in and stuff. So it's like you can make that argument too for how important a coach is. I know that was a lot and I rambled a ton in there, so hopefully it made sense. But I'll leave it at that.
I think the thing that I would like to just reiterate that you said is it's a basketball fit and a locker room fit.
Yep.
As much as it pains me to say this on a coach's corner for assembly call, the Purdue locker room, from what I can gather, is really, really tight. Yes. The way they talk about each other in the post-game conferences, and everyone has their set quotes, and they're taught to say the right things. But you just know that Coach Painter gets the guys in that want to play for Purdue, and I'm sure there's good team chemistry a little bit at IU, but there have been some issues on and off the court that have raised some concern with the chemistry. And yes, the New York Yankees back in the heyday hated each other and won World Series. So it's not you absolutely have to have great team chemistry to win, but Joe, it sure helps.
Yeah.
And I think, to part of recruiting is not just the stars. You can get all the 5 stars you want, but if they don't fit basketball wise, and if they don't fit locker room wise, then you're going to have a down year. And I think that is, you do need coaches to understand that and to work that and to have a philosophy And I think that's something that Coach Painter has done well, and why Purdue, I think he's been there 19 years. You have a consistent effort. And one of the concerns with all the IU fans that we've had 3 coaches, in the last, 15 years or so, that there lacked that consistency. You got to find the right guy who can do all of the stuff. You're seeing a lot of veterans, Joe, leave because of the new nuances, and it just takes a new breed of coach to be able to handle all of that. Joe, it's time for us to start our weekend. You and I are going to be together at Mackey Arena tomorrow night. I wish every one of you Purdue fans all the blessings in the world as you drive home with the loss tomorrow night. And all you IU fans, celebrate well tomorrow, responsibly. The front porch will be open if we do happen to pull off this miracle. But, Joe, before we go, please take some time to talk about the boiler in the stands and the Feed the Post work that you do, and then we'll call it an afternoon.
Yeah, so Boilers in the Stands is Purdue hosted show, so post-game shows after every one, kind of similar to what you guys do here at Assembly Call. Some interviews throughout with, we've had Fletcher Lawyer on this year. Last year we had Zach Eady and a couple players. So that post-game show every game is Boiler. It's under Brags in the Stands on YouTube, and then on Twitter it's at Boilers in Stands. You can follow us there. And me personally, my Twitter's here. It's listed on video, but it's at Joe Jackson CBB, and my YouTube personal is Feed the Post, where I cover Big Ten in general. And so I do a lot of film breakdowns. So I enjoy diving into the X's and O's and why things try to work the way they do, or what adjustments teams make, things like that. And that's my YouTube, Feed the Post. So I really do appreciate you having me on. I've always enjoyed talking basketball with you before the game. So it's good to be able to do it here on Assembly Call.
Well, we appreciate you coming on late notice, and you just do excellent work, and you help us understand the game of basketball, not only what's going on there at Purdue, but what's going on in the Big Ten. We'd like to continue this back and forth between the two shows. But that's going to do it for this Coach's Corner. Thanks to Jared Morris for setting it up, and Joe and everyone. We wish everyone safe travels tomorrow to the game. Thanks to Bob Thompson for the music, and we will see you tomorrow night at the postgame show. Hopefully it's a successful show for us and not successful for you, Joe. But we'll see you later. And until then,
take it from me, Jordan Halls. Keep your elbow in and your eyes on the rim. And go Hoosiers.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out.
Catch me if you can, Coach T.
She's going to see the Suns JV game. There's going to be none of that here this afternoon. Joe, again, we're still live, by the way, but thank you very much to everyone in the chat or who is listening afterwards. Thank you for watching this episode of Coach's Corner, and we will sign off. Good night, everybody.